What if the beating heart of American culture, its music, its food, its rhythm, its soul, didn't come from the places most people assume? What if the story of America is not rooted only in Boston, or Philadelphia, or Virginia, but in a city built on swampland, a city born of empire, but shaped by people empire tried to control? What if one city held the memory of Africa, the vibrancy of the Caribbean, the complexity of Europe, the resilience of indigenous America, and fused it into something entirely new? A place where identity was not just something inherited, but something actively engineered for survival. Today, we are traveling into the layered cultural world of New Orleans, a city that did not simply absorb culture, it produced it, protected it, lived it, and transformed it into a force of survival. And this is key. Culture in New Orleans is not decoration. It is not aesthetic. It is not pastime. Culture here is defense. Culture is a shield. Culture is a record of memory that could not be erased. When we talk about New Orleans as the birthplace of jazz, we are not talking about a musical genre appearing because people felt creative. We are talking about a centuries-long fight to maintain humanity and identity under systems that tried to erase both. When we talk about gumbo and jambalaya and beignets and red beans, we are talking about how memory stays alive through flavor when language, names, and family ties are threatened with destruction. When we talk about the Afro-Creole identity, we are talking about a people who refuse to allow empire to define them. New Orleans is the story of how culture itself can become a survival strategy. And if we truly want to understand American culture, our rhythms, our art, our sense of self, we must understand New Orleans, not as a tourist attraction, not as a party city, but as one of the most powerful cultural superfortresses ever built. So today, we go deeper. We go before jazz, before Mardi Gras, before the French Quarter as people know it. We go back to the foundations, to see how a city became a heartbeat of memory and resilience that changed the world. New Orleans began as a French colonial project, but France never truly controlled it. The city was planned on paper, but the land did not care about colonial drawings. Swamps, wetlands, mosquitoes, hurricanes, this was not a gentle place. Building a city here was nearly impossible. The French didn't build it, Africans did. And the Africans brought to Louisiana were not random or cultureless. Many were from Senegambia and the Niger River region, where rice cultivation, complex metallurgical traditions, and communal cultural frameworks were well developed. Others came from the Congo region, bringing syncretic spiritual practices, polyrhythmic drum patterns, and collective memory traditions. Many were Yoruba speakers, who understood religion as something lived through rhythm, dance, and connection to ancestors. And these people, these carriers of worldviews, memory systems, agricultural knowledge, spiritual languages, became the builders of this city. But here is where New Orleans diverges from what happened in the rest of the United States. Under Spanish rule, enslaved Africans and their descendants gained access, though limited, to legal mechanisms that allowed them to buy their freedom. The result was the rise of a large, educated, economically active class of free people of color. These Afro-Creole families owned property, operated businesses, composed and performed orchestral music, and formed guilds, societies, and benevolent organizations. They moved in networks that crossed the ocean: France, Cuba, Haiti, Martinique, Senegal. This was a cosmopolitan world built by the African diaspora itself. Then came the Haitian Revolution, the most successful slave uprising in human history, and it changed New Orleans permanently. thousands of Haitian refugees poured into the city. Some were white colonists, some were enslaved Africans, but many were black revolutionaries who had participated in organized rebellion and political restructuring. They brought with them not only music, language, dance, and food traditions, but political philosophy, ideas of freedom, identity, autonomy, and community organization. New Orleans became, in many ways, the northern capital of the Caribbean. French was spoken, but it was not French. Spanish was spoken, but not Spanish. African languages influenced grammar. Indigenous trade networks influenced foodways. Catholicism blended with African cosmologies. And out of this, Creole identity emerged, not as mixture, but as a chosen culture, a cultural nation. To be Creole was to understand that identity can be flexible, layered, communal, and rooted in memory. Creole identity was an act of protection. It said, we define ourselves, not empire, not law, not skin color, U.S. In the enslaved South, the greatest fear of the slaveholding class was not escape, it was memory. Because memory connects, memory organizes. Memory is identity, and identity is the foundation of resistance. This is why, in most slave states, drumming was illegal, gathering was illegal, naming ceremonies were illegal, teaching African languages was illegal. But in New Orleans, under French and Spanish rule, Catholic social norms and Caribbean precedents allowed enslaved Africans 1 day a week to gather. That day was Sunday, and the place was Congo Square. Imagine the scene. Hundreds, sometimes more than 1,000 people gathering. Banjos derived from West African instruments, drums, bells, percussion made from whatever could be found, circular dances that traced back to ancestral homelands, call and response singing, one voice calling, the community answering, voodoo ceremonies disguised as dance gatherings, storytelling, trade, courtship, healing, negotiation, cultural transmission. Congo Square was not recreation, it was reconstruction of self. In a world that tried to reduce Africans to property, Congo Square made them people again. It was here that drum rhythms merged, here that melodies adapted, here that African musical philosophies blended with European harmony structures, here that improvisation, responding in real time, became the core. An improvisation is not just a musical technique, it is a world view, a statement. We will create freedom, even when we are not given it. Congo Square became a cultural archive, a place where tradition was not preserved like a museum artifact, but was kept alive, breathed, danced, sung, embodied. Without Congo Square, there is no jazz. Without Congo Square, there is no blues, no gospel, no rhythm, and blues, no rock, no soul, no funk, no hip-hop. Congo Square is the source code of American music, a cultural heartbeat that pulsed outward and continues to shape the world. Jazz is often presented today as refined, elite, sophisticated, something to be studied in conservatories. But jazz did not begin in the halls of academia. Jazz was born in neighborhoods where survival required creativity. In Treme, where free Afro-Creole musicians learned European classical music and then reinterpreted it according to African rhythmic principles. In Storyville, where musicians played in brothels, bars, social halls, parades, and funerals, improvising not because it was fashionable, but because the moment demanded response. Jazz was people making meaning out of whatever life gave them. If the melody broke, invent a new one. If the instrument was damaged, adapt. If the mood changed, follow. Jazz taught a lesson in freedom that America had not yet learned. Freedom is not always about escape. Sometimes freedom is the ability to reinvent the moment. Buddy Bolden played loud because to be heard was a political act. Jelly Roll Morton claimed he invented jazz because he understood that cultural ownership is power. King Oliver, Sidney Bechet, and others shaped the emotional grammar of the music. Then came Louis Armstrong, a man who understood that the trumpet could speak like a human being. Armstrong didn't just play notes, he expanded the emotional capacity of melody. He stretched time. He made the beat a living presence, not a fixed structure. Jazz traveled. New Orleans musicians carried it up the Mississippi River, Memphis, St. Louis, Chicago, and then across the ocean. And with it traveled the idea that identity can be created in real time. Jazz was not escape. Jazz was survival expressed as beauty. Music was one cultural shield. Food was another. Gumbo is not a recipe. It is history you can taste. Okra from Africa, filet powder from Indigenous Choctaw, roux from France, rice-growing knowledge from Senegambia, spice patterns from Haiti and Cuba. Every ingredient is a memory. And these dishes were preserved not in written form, but in spoken memory, in kitchens where children learned by watching their mothers, grandmothers, aunties, neighbors. Cooking was cultural transmission, disguised as daily life. Language, too, was survival. Louisiana Creole and Louisiana French preserved African grammar patterns beneath European vocabulary. When people speak Creole, they are speaking a history of resilience. And spirituality, especially voodoo, was a network of community care. Misrepresented for centuries, voodoo was rooted in healing, relationship with ancestors, reverence for forces of nature. Marie Laveau was not a mythic sorceress. She was a community leader, a strategist, a protector. Voodoo circles provided support networks when hospitals refused black patients, when law enforcement posed danger, when society tried to fracture community ties. Food, language, and spirituality were not hobbies. They were anchors. They said, "We know who we are. We will not be erased." Even into the modern era, Jim Crow, segregation, urban renewal, hurricanes, forced displacement, tourism-driven gentrification, New Orleans culture remains a living defensive structure. The Mardi Gras Indians, in their elaborate beadwork suits, honor the history of alliances between escaped Africans and indigenous nations. Each suit is thousands of hours of labor, an act of devotion to memory. The social aid and pleasure clubs were the backbone of black community self-governance long before public services existed. They paid for funerals, medical bills, disaster relief, and education. They still do. The second-line parades are not just celebrations, they are living expressions of continuity. The line moves forward. The rhythm moves forward. The community moves forward. Jazz funerals teach a worldview. Grief and joy are partners. Death is transition, not absence. Music guides the spirit home. After Hurricane Katrina, when the state failed, when infrastructure collapsed, when entire neighborhoods were scattered, it was cultural networks, the clubs, the parades, the musicians, the churches, the voodoo temples, the aunties, the cousins, the corner kitchens that rebuilt social life. Culture is what made return possible. Culture is what made healing possible. In New Orleans, culture does not simply describe life. Culture sustains life. It remains one of the last places in America where identity is not market product, but shared inheritance. So when we talk about New Orleans, we are not talking about just a city. We are talking about one of the greatest cultural centers in the history of the Americas. A place where memory survived the Middle Passage, where identity withstood slavery. where music rose from sorrow and transformed the world, where food carried names and stories when spoken language was restricted, where spirituality protected the soul when law offered no protection. New Orleans is a living lesson in resilience. Culture can be resistance. Culture can be survival. Culture can be freedom. And it continues, right now, today. Every parade, every song, every shared meal, every prayer to the ancestors is a declaration. We are still here. What did you think about today's video? Comment your thoughts and suggestions for my next video below.